Hi, and welcome to the Dawn Show. Dawn Stensland-Menti here. Today, we are talking about how to talk to your children or the children in your life about death. My guests today are Karen Zinn, who's the founder and creator of HeartToSoul.com, and Joseph Primo, executive director of Good Grief and the author of the book, What Do We Tell Our Children? There's the book, What Do We Tell the Children? It's so good to have you both here.
Thanks for having us.
And for Karen, I know you were here before, but for Joe, first time on the Dawn Show here.
Yeah, thanks.
So how did you get into, you run Good Grief, you actually counsel children. What brought you to that?
I got involved with Good Grief after being a hospice chaplain for 4 years at the first hospice in the U.S., the Connecticut Hospice, and I was with many people while they were dying, and a lot of them were young folks, and I was just seeing time and time again, I'd be with them at the time of death, and I'd essentially be sending the kids out into the world with little to no support, and yet something incredibly profound happened to them. And I wanted to make an impact on those kids to make sure that they had a support system in place in a time and in a world where we don't do such a good job in talking openly about death.
And often, Joe, we hear in the news something will happen in a school, let's say, and they'll say, we're bringing in the grief counselors. So they bring in those are the triage kind of folks, but then you'll do the follow-up, which is critical.
Yeah, that's right. Essentially, there are systems in place where we can respond to public tragedy, whether that be something like Newtown, whether that be some other sort of big event, or they'll come in if there's a death of a student or a parent and provide some counseling and support. But grief is not a 24-hour, 48-hour, or week-long thing. It's ongoing, and it needs ongoing support for the whole year and for years that are following. That a death has a huge impact on a community.
And so, Joe, while you're hands-on and working with children and educating in the schools, Karen, you're an interesting story because you actually had a coworker who was here on the show whose daughter died tragically, and you and everybody at your workplace said, how do we deal with this? And so you ended up running this wonderful Heart to Soul website, which people can tap into. It's a resource. What touched you so much that you continue on?
Well, you know, I felt, you met Steve, he's a wonderful guy, but we would be in meetings and he would bring up his daughter's name and I felt like running away. And like you were saying, we don't know, we're not taught as children how to support our friends. We're not taught really what death is. We're not taken through that process as children. And I think when we aren't taken through that process as children, as adults, we don't know what to do when our friends are facing loss and facing grief. And so I think with Steve in particular, I just wanted to find that information out. And once I found it, I put it up on the website and it kind of grew from there.
Were you surprised at how many people would tap into your website, which has grown? Were you surprised at the number of people who just were searching for answers?
I did it because I felt like I found the information. I couldn't find it when I needed it, and so I wanted it to be there when somebody else found it. I figured if I needed it, somebody else was looking for it too.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of really great programs like Joe's that provide grief support, but there's not a lot of information or support programs for people who are trying to support their friends. So like they're not immediately affected by the grief, but they're working with the people.
And let's go through. So how do you, when you're talking to children, what's important to say when someone has died in their life?
I think honesty is the keystone of the conversation. I mean, it's the foundation of of having that dialogue. I think that there's this idea out there that as parents, our job is to protect a childhood's innocence, and that's just not reality. You can't. Bad things happen. They happen every day, and they happen to kids. And if we're in honest communication and honest dialogue about these things, we're empowering kids to develop coping skills for the rest of their lives. So that is what happens at Good Grief. With open and honest conversation, we are helping kids not only rebuild their lives after death, but to figure out how to move forward and to have hope and ultimately cope when something else bad happens, whether that be a death, whether that be not getting on the soccer team, you know, the big stuff and the little stuff. It's about how do I manage these feelings and these emotions, and having honest feedback and communications with adult is really how we're going to empower kids. To Karen's point, about a kid experiences a death. They're looking to all the adults in the room to figure out, what do I do? What do I say?
And
How
first
do
of
I
all,
engage this?
so it's starting with a practical definition. Is that correct? I mean, what is death? What happened?
Well, it's interesting. So I told you that I used to be a hospice chaplain, and I'm interacting in a context, in a space where people are bringing their spiritual beliefs. And that has a place depending on the family's history and context. But what's more important than that is literal definitions. So I'm all about keeping it biological. How does the body work? How do we function? And that is what causes death, because kids are concrete thinkers, and that provides them with an understanding that death is not some abstract thing. It's a physical experience.
And then we had follow up with your personal beliefs. In other words, in our family, when my Uncle Don passed away, we said Uncle Don's in heaven now. So it's important then to share what you believe, right?
Yeah, I've got a great story. So a couple of kids came to Good Grief, and their grandmother died, and their parents kept saying that grandma was in heaven, and the kid's like, okay, I understand that, I've heard that before. But then after the funeral services, they go to the cemetery, and the little girl, I think she was like 3 or 4, I could just imagine her like she's tugging on Dad's suit, like, if grandma's in heaven, who's in the box?
Right.
That was the question. There was a disconnect because the metaphor was confusing for that child.
So to explain the physicality of that, I mean, just in real simple terms.
Yeah, exactly.
And while it might feel kind to use softer language like passed away I think it's very important to be very definitive and use words like died and dead. I mean, it's true. I mean, you didn't lose somebody, they died. And I don't mean to be harsh about that, but I think it's the reality. If we use the softer language, there's more room for confusion.
Just give that encyclopedic knowledge.
Yep.
I love on your website, you actually work with Sesame Workshop.
Yes.
And so you have these wonderful Elmo videos that,
Yes.
and nobody could explain this in a better way than Elmo for the kids.
That's
right. Yep.
When our conversation continues, we'll talk more about Elmo and Sesame Street and more about coping and what you need to know as the Dawn Show continues.
Yeah, Daddy?
He won't be there. Do you remember how we talked about your Uncle Jack? He died.
Oh, yeah, well, Elmo can just show it to Uncle Jack next time.
Well, I'm afraid not, son.
But Elmo can call him on the phone, right?
No, son. You see, when someone dies, it means they're not alive anymore. Their body has stopped working. They don't eat or breathe or talk on the phone.
Oh.
Uncle Jack died. You have any questions? I mean, you can always ask me anything.